由於已經到咗
It's already the appointed time. I'll call meeting to order. First, let's confirm the minutes of our meeting. Paper CB 4731/1415 and also CB 4733/1415. There are minutes of our policy address on the 16th of January and minutes of our meeting on the 9th of February 2015, respectively. The minutes have been circulated to members. So far, the Secretariat has not received any proposal for amendments. If there aren't, may I invite members to endorse the two sets of minutes. Thank you. Thank you for confirming the minutes. Second, information papers issued since the last meeting. There are 3 in total. For details, please refer to the agenda. Third, items for discussion at the next meeting. Paper CB 4748/1415. Annex or Appendices 1 and 2. The next meeting is scheduled for the 11th of May at 4:35 as usual on Monday. The administration has got a proposal for us, and that is a 3-year pilot scheme to promote professional exchange and diversified development of sister schools in Hong Kong and the mainland. And then another proposal is for construction of a 12-classroom special school at Hoylite Estate and reprovisioning of a special school for mildly handicapped children. And then in the former police quarters at Tanner Road, North Point, to build a 24-classroom primary school for whole-day primary education. If members have no further proposals on the agenda, I will discuss with the administration as to what else can be included in the agenda for the next meeting. In accordance with ROP 83A, if members have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest in any of the items on the agenda, please disclose the nature of the interest before we start the discussion. Okay, the first is using Putonghua as the medium of instruction for teaching the Chinese language subject in primary and secondary schools in Hong Kong. Please invite Mr. Eddie Ng, Secretary for Education, and his team to join us. Paper CB 4748/1415 members who are interested to speak on this item, will you please raise your hands. Mr. Tony Zhang, well, I'm not on this item, but I have to leave because of an official commitment. So I'd like to refer to the paper for item 6. Construction of student hostels. Now, if you allow me, I would submit a letter on behalf of the Liberal Party to support the item. Of course, I have to declare interest. I am an elected representative of the Council to the Chinese University Council. Thank you. All right, please let us have your letter. May I give the floor to Mr. Eddie Ng to walk us through the paper? Thank you, Chairman. Our language education policies to enhance students' biliteracy and trilingualism. And that means students should be able to communicate effectively in English, Cantonese, and Chinese, and be able to write proper Chinese and English. The Chinese language subject and Putonghua subject are one of the core subjects for primary and early or junior secondary education. The two are complementary, and we have different texts to train students' ability in writing, reading, listening, speaking, as well as literature, Chinese culture, moral and effective development, thinking, and independent language learning. And the aim of Putonghua subject is to enable students to master the common spoken language of the Han nationality, and so as to enhance their understanding of the Chinese culture and knowledge about the language. Primary and secondary schools are free to choose whether Putonghua or Cantonese should be used as the medium of instruction for Chinese language, depending on the readiness of their student, of their teachers and student, and standard of students, so on and so forth. Scholar, that is the Standing Committee on Language Education and Research, launched in 2008 an action plan to raise language standards in Hong Kong. It has got a support scheme to provide schools which wished to try out using Putonghua to teach the Chinese language subject with the necessary subjects. It was a pilot scheme, and it ended in August 2014. We have started a longitudinal study on the implementation of the program, and to better understand the use of PMIC. And we've also got a mainland Hong Kong teachers exchange and collaboration program, so that mainland language experts can provide advice to schools as required. To have proper PMIC, we need a rich Putonghua language environment. Most primary and secondary schools are able to launch various extracurricular activities to create a Putonghua language environment for students so that they can use the language to communicate. We're committed to enhancing students' communication abilities in Putonghua, English, and Cantonese. The Bureau will continue to provide professional support to teachers so that students' standards in Putonghua, English, and Cantonese can be continuously enhanced. Thank you. A lot of members have requested to speak. I'll read out the names. If I've missed out any, please let me know. Wong Kwok Hing, Michael Tian, Tommy Zhang, An Zhang, Gary Fan, Ip Kim Yun, Ip Kwok Him, Ma Fong Kwok, Sarah Lee, Helena Wong, Sid Ho. Have I left out any? Okay, 3 minutes each. There will be no second round. Mr. Wong Kwok Hing. Mr. Wong Kwok Hing. Thank you, Chairman. PMIC is a right and good direction forward. When I was Eastern District Councillor on Hong Kong Island, there are two famous schools with PMIC. One is Kong Siu Sujian Primary School, and I think and Fukien primary schools, and I think they've been quite effective. But we know that education takes time to bear fruits. We need readiness on the part of the teaching team, and there must be the right language environment in schools so that students can familiarize with the language and can use it in their daily lives. So my question for the Secretary is, I noticed that it is the Bureau's long-term and developmental target when it comes to PMIC. Do you know how many schools are already well equipped and experienced in PMIC? And what is your short-term and medium-term goals? Can you elaborate, please? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wong. Well, PMIC has been launched for 4 years, and I think we have gathered a lot of valuable experience in the process. First, there are different modes of implementation. In some schools, they use PMIC throughout the school, and for some schools, they do it in some grades and some classes only. So we do not have very hard data, because in some schools there may only be one class using PMIC. But if we use information from 2009 to 2012 to 2013, %90 of the schools are involved in a questionnaire survey. In 2008-09, the figure was 55%, and then in 2013-14, the figure rose to 70.4%. For secondary schools, the percentage rose from 81.3 to 37%, still rising trend, although to not a large extent. Putonghua is a core subject in primary and junior secondary education. Mr. Michael Tian, I will share with you some comments I have heard. So you talked about the 70% of primary schools who claimed that they had used PMIC. They started in P1 in order to prepare for TSA in P3 because the oral part is conducted in Cantonese, and therefore some schools they switch to use Cantonese as a media of instruction for Chinese language in P2 and P3, and then in P3, P4 the schools may switch to PMIC again, and then P6 CMIC. So I don't know whether they are really using Putonghua or Cantonese as a medium of instruction. Now for secondary schools, since the percentage was only 37%, so let's set aside the secondary schools first.
Nah. Well, they switch from one mode to another mode because of the TSA. Changing the medium of instruction like this is not going to benefit the learning of language. Very likely that they are neither good at Putonghua or Cantonese. So this is what I've heard. Secretary, do you know that this is a common phenomenon? And if they keep switching the medium of instruction, how would you describe such a chaotic situation of switching medium of instruction all the time? I'll defer to my colleague, Mrs. Chan, in a moment. First of all, we have to consider what are involved. First, to learn Chinese language, and also to learn Putonghua, as well as to learn Chinese through the medium of Putonghua. Well, I was asking questions about the third aspect. We have noted that because in the TSA, the school can choose either to take the test in Cantonese or Putonghua. We have been reviewing the TSA and the direction to take in the future. We have a steering committee set up to carry out a comprehensive review on the TSA. And if necessary, we can collect further data to look into the matter. Well, if the government admits that this is a common phenomenon, if the medium of instruction is switched so often, what kind of problem do we have? Well, we have the biliteracy and trilingualism as a policy, so the switch from Cantonese to Putonghua is just a matter of choice. Ms. Ann Jiang. You started the pilot scheme on PMIC in 2009, and it ended in 2014. Do you have an end of project report?
咧嗰個成效如何啊？
You assess the effectiveness of the scheme. Secretary, thank you for your question. After the completion of the pilot scheme in 2013-2014, we invited 8 universities to carry out a longitudinal study and to gauge the experience of the schools involved. The scheme is considered beneficial in certain aspects. For example, when the students learn more in Putonghua, then their writing contains fewer vernacular terms or slangs. Secondly, support to teacher is very important for the success of the scheme, and also the learning environment, the language environment is very important. That's why I've mentioned extracurricular activities and special support measures. Sorry, we are talking about PMIC, the teaching of Chinese language. Yes, we invite the teachers to come to Hong Kong, and they will station in schools for 2 days per week, so as to collaborate with teachers in planning activities and student activities. I will invite the Deputy Secretary to supplement. We have assessed the effectiveness of the scheme. In the primary schools, a lot would depend on the competence of the teachers and the ability of the students. For the secondary school students, their ability, the prior experience will be very important, an important factor. Ms. Ann Zhang? So in the future, is it going to be up to the school to choose Cantonese or Putonghua as a medium of instruction for the teaching of Chinese language? I must stress that Putonghua is very important because in Southeast Asia, in other overseas Chinese communities, Putonghua is the common language. If you think in Cantonese, you find it very difficult to write in Chinese. If you cannot insist on PMIC for the teaching of Chinese language, then I'm disappointed. So the Bureau should give more resources and encouragement to schools to continue to adopt Putonghua as the medium of instruction. The Education Bureau, since 2009-2010, injected $180 million through the Language Fund in the PMIC pilot project. But the education sector and the community have a query that there is no academic basis or academic reasons for doing that. And now students are not learning well in Chinese language and in Putonghua. 97% of Hong Kong people use Cantonese. If you can learn Putonghua well, it doesn't mean that you can learn Chinese language well. And last year, the Bureau even defined Cantonese as a non-official language. Our schools do not really teach the phonics of Cantonese. Do you know? Well, what's that? Do you know? Do you know the catchphrase that is like a tangerine on a shine? It means that it's weavering all the time. The pilot scheme ended in August 2014. Has the Education Bureau assessed the effectiveness? According to the paper, paragraph 22, you are going to take actions to continually upgrade the Chinese language competency and Putonghua competency of our students, and also Cantonese proficiency as well. What have you done to enhance the competency in Cantonese? Well, we invited universities to carry out a post-pilot scheme assessment, so we have looked into the experience. Can we be given the assessment report? Well, that's a pilot scheme that lasted for 4 years. 160 schools in the 4-year period were involved. They were given different support measures. The schools were given a choice to opt for different modes depending on the readiness of the students and the teachers, and also the school policies. The schools can choose what to do, what options they prefer. So there's no question of favoring one to another. What have you done to enhance the competency in Cantonese language? We are speaking Cantonese every day. Do we need to create a linguistic environment for Cantonese? We're going to create a linguistic environment for both. We understand that Putonghua is important. It's not that we don't need to learn Putonghua, but learning Putonghua is different from using Putonghua as a medium of instruction in learning Chinese language. There's a big difference here. If we read the paper, you know that there are a support measure for PMIC, which has ended. The pilot scheme has ended. A question has been asked whether there's been any assessment, and will the assessment report be made open? If you have a report stating the effectiveness, and if it's claimed that the effectiveness is very good, can we be given the report? Secretary, we have conducted some study into the experience of the participating schools and also the difficulties they have raised. My question is a simple one. Are you going to make public the report? I'll ask the Deputy Secretary to supplement. We have received the initial report. There's a committee under Scholar which would have a detailed discussion on the findings. At the appropriate time, we are going to make the report public. We can have another round of discussion once we are given the findings. I hope we can adopt an education perspective in discussing PMIC, and that is what do we want to achieve. We want students to learn Putonghua well and Chinese language well, and they can also use Cantonese well. So what can be done to better achieve these targets? If we use PMIC in primary schools, can these objectives be reached? But of course, I don't know the findings in the assessment conducted by the Education Bureau. According to the education sector, there are people expressing reservation about the effectiveness of PMIC. And it said that it may not be able to enhance or raise Chinese language competency. Certain assumptions that we have may not turn out to be true. If we have the report given to us, and if we are given the findings of the assessment, then we can discuss when to do certain things. Should we start PMIC in primary schools, or should we use mother tongue in the primary schools so as to improve the mastery of the mother tongue, that is Cantonese, in communication first before we move on to something else? Mr. Yip Kok Kim. The mastery of Putonghua is important to Chinese people, so we have to promote biliteracy and trilingualism in our schools. When it comes to the use of Putonghua in the teaching of Chinese language, where it is popularly applied, but there's no consensus in the education sector on whether this should be done. We need to do some assessment. Speaking from my own experience, if you start early, if you start PMIC early, there are certainly some merits. it would certainly allow students to master Chinese language better. But in August 2014, the pilot scheme ended, as the Secretary has told us. I do have some queries. Why haven't you shared the findings of the assessment of the pilot scheme? Why didn't you come to discuss with us before you ended the pilot scheme? We don't know the pros and the cons and the benefits and disadvantages of the scheme. So on what basis did you come to the decision to end the scheme?
Secretary, yes, it is important. As set out in para 15 of the paper, most schools would want support from mainland experts. So the collaboration program will continue. We'll continue to provide support to schools using this collaboration program. And in extracurricular activities through the use of drama, role-playing, visits, and seminars, and exchange activities among students. And Putonghua Days, they are learning activities. There should be more sharing among schools. So we are assisting the implementation of this part. Thank you, Secretary. Since I have a long queue, I have to draw the line here. Ma Fong Kwok, Starry Lee, Wong Pek Wan, Albert Ho, Sid Ho, Chen Chi Chun, and Mrs. Regina Ip. Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. According to the paper, there is no consensus yet, and views of experts have also been quoted. I'd like to ask the administration whether you have gauged the views of students or teachers or schools who were involved in the support scheme. I am done with my question. Thank you, Mr. Ma. There are two parts to Mr. Ma's question. First, we have gathered a lot of feedback and comments from schools. Many schools are of the view that Putonghua is already a core subject of primary and junior secondary education. They are already in a better position to implement PMIC. Yes. We go to schools to look at what's happening there. But schools have different circumstances. In some schools, teachers are not so confident, and support from parents is also important. Has the administration studied when is the best stage for PMIC to be implemented? I don't think I've got a very concrete answer. Secretary, thank you, Chairman. To learn a language, the earlier you start, the better. So after 6 years old, at the start of primary schooling, this is an excellent time. Yes, some KGs are thinking about that, but we have to ensure there will not be a pressure on students. About 50 to 70% of the primary schools are using PMIC in either one class or one grade of the school. So this is the reality. So the administration is convinced that this is the right time. But do you have any scientific data to back up your view? 6 months ago, I went to Shanghai to join a conference on language development. There was information from many experts. Ms. Starley, DB supports PMIC. It should be the right direction and is welcomed by both parents and students. But I think the focus of our discussion is whether PMIC is the best way to enhance the proficiency of Chinese language. I think the choice of the media of instruction is not always about the effectiveness of learning. So there are other considerations when it comes to PMIC. But, Secretary, I'm quite disappointed with the paper you provided us with, because there is no goal, no target, no figures. We have hundreds of schools in Hong Kong. You don't even know the number of classes using PMIC and the number of teachers who are qualified to implement PMIC. You don't have such statistics for us. Can you disclose such data? I respect schools' right to choose, but it is unfair to students and parents if it's because of a state of readiness on the part of teachers. Can you tell us the number of schools and the number of classes using PMIC and the number of teachers that are qualified to teach in PMIC? Thank you. May I ask the PS to answer this question? The DS, please. There is no specific qualification for teachers as far as PMIC is concerned. However, a Putonghua teacher has to have some professional qualifications. We do have some data, but it is not territory-wide, and there are changes year on year. So we can provide a written answer later. And we can give you the rough idea later. Yes, I'd like to know whether the Bureau is committed or determined to ensure that all Chinese language teachers can teach or qualified to teach with PMIC, so that all schools can implement PMIC. Primary and secondary schools have raised their Putonghua standards, so they are already better prepared for PMIC. And with more support, teachers are more confident. Next, please include this part in your written reply. Dr. Wang, we support by literacy and trilingualism. However, we really challenge a PMIC. Para 7 says that a PMIC is a long-term and developmental target of the Chinese language curriculum. When have you consulted the community of Hong Kong? Since when have teachers or the education sector agreed that PMIC should be a long-term and developmental target of the Chinese language curriculum? When have you made this decision on behalf, even before consulting us? So should PMIC be a decision by the education provision? Well, Tofu and Li Bai, when they wrote poetry, did they think in terms of Putonghua? Well, there are 9 tones in Cantonese. Why should we force students to turn to a 4-tone Putonghua in thinking? Why should it be that in the long term, no teachers or no students should learn the Chinese language in Cantonese? No. Dr. Wong, there is nothing from the Bureau to say that PMIC is a must. But you look at the paper, it said it is a long-term and developmental target. In 2003, there was a study by a scholar, and that was the recommendation there. For details, may I defer to the DS. There was no mention whether it should be a long-term and developmental target. So in 2003, a scholar was entrusted to discuss it. But that was just a recommendation by a scholar, but you have translated that into a long-term and developmental target in your paper. So a recommendation or suggestion by a scholar a few years ago will be a policy for all schools in Hong Kong. They must use Cantonese to teach the Chinese language. Please look at DSE candidates who have scored 5 stars in 5 double asterisks in their Chinese language. How many of them learned the Chinese language in Putonghua? Well, there is no contradiction. But well, even if we have CMIC, Cantonese, as the medium of instruction, we will not harm the learning of the Chinese language by students. Then why do you say that PMIC is a long-term and developmental target? You can choose between Cantonese and Putonghua now, but not in the future. Is that correct? Your time is up. Dr. Wong, Mr. Albert Ho. In fact, this so-called long-term and developmental target should not be in the administration's paper. How many studies have you conducted, and what evidence do you have to say that PMIC is more effective in Chinese language learning, and that we're also well prepared to do that? Now, the Secretary said that it would help the learning of the Chinese subject, Chinese language, and then he said that it would help to enhance Putonghua proficiency. I don't know whether you have been to if you have listened to any verse speaking, Chinese verse speaking. Many people feel that whether we talk about lyrics or Chinese poetry, Cantonese is more expressive than Putonghua. So Cantonese is our mother tongue, and I think there are certainly merits in using Cantonese to learn the Chinese language. And people say that students' Chinese proficiency is already bad, and you want them to learn in Putonghua, and we don't know how ready our teachers are. And when we go to meetings, we're told that the Putonghua proficiency of students or Hong Kong people is improving. You do not have any data to substantiate that using Putonghua to teach the Chinese language is superior. So in your paper, you say the PMIC is a long-term and developmental target of the Chinese language curriculum. You must explain carefully, otherwise there will be many follow-up questions. Yes, the important thing is we got a long-term and developmental target. The pilot scheme was conducted in 2008 to 2014. There are 1,000 schools in Hong Kong, and only 40 schools took part in the support scheme. Many students asked about the experience gathered in the support scheme. So we have to confirm this policy. Well, you are not sure about the effectiveness yet. Why should you set the target here? As a matter of principle, why do you say that Putonghua must be used unless it is a political consideration, and that is there must be standardization throughout the country? This we oppose. And secondly, you may say that PMIC is superior for Chinese language learning, but you don't have data to substantiate that. Ms. Hilo is not here, so I'll give the floor to Mr. Chen Chi-Chun first. I'd like to know whether it is one of your targets for students to learn Cantonese properly? What resources have been put in to ensure students can learn Cantonese properly? I agree that Putonghua is important, and I also support trilingualism. We can have more Putonghua lessons in schools to enhance Putonghua proficiency, but I'm against the PMIC because for kids, they have not acquired Cantonese proficiency well. I was involved in the education of young DJs, and I noticed that many students cannot articulate or pronounce Cantonese properly. For instance, some legislators here cannot differentiate between guok, as in country, and gok, as in North Point or horn. They cannot articulate the consonant properly. So if you do not enhance our students' Cantonese proficiency, how are you going to correct their pronunciation? Do you expect to do that when you're teaching them mathematics? And when you use PMIC, will there be a drop in the proficiency of children's Cantonese? Of course not, because you do not have any assessment for the Cantonese proficiency of students or teachers.
If a student cannot learn Cantonese pronunciation properly, then parents and teachers have to be blamed. Because if the parents pronounce a word wrong, the child may think that it's the same word. Can you distinguish these two words in Cantonese, dang and dan? That's why I think that we should ask our children to learn Cantonese properly first. If you implement PMIC, that may result in students not being able to master Cantonese. And how are you going to measure proficiency in Cantonese if PMIC is implemented? Are you teaching our students the phonics of Cantonese? Would you allow the Secretary some time to respond? Well, today the discussion is about PMIC. And we attach equal importance to trilingualism and biliteracy. PMIC is a pilot scheme. It will not affect the development of Cantonese as a language. But that's what you say. Mrs. Regina Yip. According to the Baidu search engine, Li Bai is a person in the western region of China. Of course, Li Bai, Du Fu will not be composing their poems in Cantonese. Of course, I understand that Cantonese has reserved many old pronunciations. If you learn Putonghua properly, you know the difference in of similar words, such as dang and dan, or guok and gok. Some people have alleged that you have a political agenda in promoting PMIC. There are many elite schools, for example, St. Paul's Coeducational School and other DSS schools, Chinese International School, and so on. They're all using PMIC. Do they have any ulterior motive in doing this? Are you going to promote the same, Secretary? Well, when the conditions are good, they would be able to promote this and enhance the students' competence in Chinese language. That's why PMIC can be very helpful. What are the conditions? Please tell us the conditions required for this. First of all, this is an education policy. It's got nothing to do with politics. And I have visited those schools referred to by the member. Their teachers' qualifications are very good in using Putonghua to teach Chinese language. They have exchange programs, and they have collaboration with sister schools. So that's a good environment. And the parents are also offering very good linguistic environment in their homes. So are you talking about new immigrants? Who are they? We spend $70 billion, $80 billion in the education system. We should continually improve the conditions. We have a number of support measures. Aided schools think that those measures are very helpful. For example, exchange programs for the teachers and mainland teachers stationing in schools to help local schools. Mr. Ho, 2 minutes. Thank you. PMIC is about teaching the Chinese language through the media Putonghua. I think the better approach is to separate Putonghua and Chinese language as two subjects. First of all, Cantonese phonics are closer to the ancient pronunciation. You can try this out to read poems, and you know the rhyme sometimes can only be felt or expressed in Cantonese, but not in Putonghua. So if you say PMIC can enhance literacy in Chinese, then I have doubts. And also, how many of these teachers are qualified to teach in Putonghua when their mother tongue is Cantonese? I'm concerned that you will be sacrificing the teaching for the sake of using Putonghua, because teaching of the Chinese language is not just about the language, it's also about the culture. A teacher born in southern China and another one born in northern China will be very different in the teaching of Chinese language. So I'm concerned that if you use Putonghua, students may not be able to learn properly about southern China culture. Why don't you insist on mother tongue? All right. I think I should wrap up this item here. We'll proceed to the next item. So thank you for your attendance, Mr. Ng and your team. Mr. Gary Fang, I sent you a letter before the meeting asking for a public hearing to be conducted. Are we going to discuss this in the next meeting? Well, I only received the letter on Friday. I'm going to deal with it in the next meeting, or maybe under AOB today. Dr. Helen Wong, I've given you notice that I'm going to move a motion in this meeting. I hope that we can put that to a vote. It's also on the use of Putonghua in the teaching of Chinese language. But we have completed that particular item. Maybe we should deal with this under AOB. Next, standard of school premises and upgrading of facilities of special schools. For this item, we have the Undersecretary, Mr. Kevin Young. Over to you, Mr. Young. The government strives to provide suitable school premises for special schools, and we've also reviewed the needs of different schools and find different ways and means to improve their facilities. For example, in situ reprovisioning, upgrading of classrooms and facilities. We have 68 special schools in Hong Kong. each and every school would have regard to the special needs of the students, or they were built in following different standards of different times. So they have different facilities. 43 of these schools benefited from the school improvement program that lasted from 1994 to 2006. And since the introduction of the new secondary school curriculum and also the extension of the curriculum and schools development program, we have carried out conversion works for some special schools. 14 of them have completed their conversion works. And in 2014-2015, we have reprovisioned 11 special schools. Another 4 have their reprovisioning projects ongoing. It's 25% of all special schools. Land is scarce in Hong Kong. When we consider the need to redevelop or reprovision special schools, we have to proceed with care. The Education Bureau would continue to upgrade the facilities and standards for new special schools, and will keep under review these facilities of special schools and seek different ways and means to make improvements. Thank you for your introduction, Under Secretary. So far, we have 2 members who would like to ask questions. Dr. Fernando Cheung, Dr. Kenneth Chan, Mr. Albert Ho. Any more? Dr. Helena Wong. 3 minutes for questions and answers, Dr. Fernando Cheung. In the past, we saw that many special schools had problems with their premises. They are run by different school sponsors, Caritas, Polanco, and so on. There's one in Wall Chair, very close to your school, Chairman. And there's another one for the mildly mentally or mild intellectual disability. I won't repeat all the details. The coordination is usually carried out by the Education Bureau when it comes to school premises. But for special school projects, there's a property vetting committee. The chairman of the committee is assistant director of the ASD. And there are representatives from the Government Property Agency and the Financial Services and Treasury Bureau. That's strange. How knowledgeable are these people about special schools? That's why we had the case of Puyoy. The number of students has doubled, but the physiotherapy room and the nursing room have their sizes reduced, and they have one big staircase for schools that provide education to physically handicapped children. Sometimes when the representatives are very good, they would come up with very good special school campuses. For example, there's one in Tin Shui Wai. The design won an award. But in the case of a school called Puyoy, that's a disaster. So, Undersecretary, you should take up the role of the coordinator. Why is it that the school projects for ordinary schools and special schools are so different? First of all, can you clarify if this is really the case? All school facilities will be assessed and approved by the vetting committee. For ordinary schools, the school campus and the facilities are standard provisions. So the committee would assess the schedule of accommodation for, say, primary schools and secondary schools once every 3 years, and that would be applied. But for special schools, each of them is different. That's because of the different needs. So what kind of rooms should be required, what kind of facilities should be needed, that the vetting committee would be looking into each and every case. I have two questions about the document. It's claimed that only a small minority of special schools that have not benefited by the improvement program because of different circumstances or feasibility problems. Can you give us a list of these schools? And also the specific difficulties that have prevented them from benefiting from the improvement program? I have been showing concern about the barrier-free facilities in mainstream schools and whether we have done all we can. In June 2013, I put a written question to the government on this topic.
And the answer we got from the administration was there was no statistics on barrier-free facilities in schools, and in general, all schools had to comply with the guidelines and so forth. This has made us rather uneasy. The broad direction is integrated education, and should there be special needs, students should be returned to special schools. So it's been 2 years since I asked that question. I'd like to know whether there's been any review, whether they have done any survey of such facilities in schools. On the Secretary, I think Professor Chen is talking about school improvement program, SIP, in Para 7. Well, 40 schools have benefited under SIP, and the list can be found in Annex A, and for the remaining 17, they are those that cannot benefit from this SIP. If Dr. Chen would like us to give him a list of the 17 schools that cannot benefit under SIP, we can certainly provide the list later. And he talked about facilities in ordinary schools. Is he asking whether these facilities can suit the needs of SENs? I think we've said that within our possible limits, we will try our best to ensure that. Of course, it also depends on the environment of the school, the size, whether it will allow us to install, for instance, a lift. Because in some schools, there isn't really space for installing a lift. While Dr. Fernando Zhang was speaking, Mr. Zhang Kwok-chi said that a motion is going to move a motion, so I must reserve time to deal with this motion. A few members are waiting, and I have to draw a line after that. Albert Ho, Helena Wong, Leung Kwok-hong, Dennis Kwok, and Sid Ho, first round. I have to draw the line here. And second round, Dr. Fernando Zhang, I only allow you because you were the first to raise your hand. Ms. Albert Ho. Yes, I will make my remarks succinct. In terms of planning and design, we must take into account special considerations, and we should not just look at it from a medical perspective. You should consider the educational needs as well as the involvement of other disciplines, so that schools can be designed to suit the needs. And according to Dr. Zhang Kwok-chi's motion, there should be a mode, social responsibility supportive mode. So will you use this for future design? Do you have a proper advisory or consultative framework to ensure that future design will not be just considered by the property vetting committee? Under Secretary, When we design or we provision a special school, we will work it out with the school sponsoring body as to how a school can be best designed to suit the needs of their target students. Now, if it is reprovisioning, the school sponsoring body knows who are their target students, so they will usually add facilities to better suit their needs, and we encourage schools to consult parents more often so that they can tell us what they need and what they want in the school campus. So we have already incorporated views from the community to come up with a design that better suit the needs of students. But what about those special schools that have been refurbished or improved? How come the facilities are so inadequate? Is it because you did not employ this consultative approach in the past? Well, if you refer to schools refurbished or built a long time ago, I cannot comment on them. But usually our consultative process will gradually improve. Dr. Fernando Zhang raised a very special case, but for most of the projects, parents are very happy. When it comes to retrofitting of facilities, this is subject to constraints of the school. Sometimes the new facilities may not be able to suit the demand of the school or parents. For instance, if there isn't enough space, the lift has to be smaller, inevitably. Dr. Helena Wong, there are 60 special schools now. Has the administration take stock of the physical conditions of these 60 schools? How many of them were built a long time ago or dilapidated, and that they have to be refurbished or improved? Secretary, as we explained in the paper, every year we go to check the physical conditions of schools. For instance, the student intake for that year, and whether major renovation and new facilities are needed. We do that as an annual exercise. From 2000 to now, take into account new special schools to be built. We've already got 15, accounting for 1/4 of the special schools in Hong Kong. But there are schools that are really rather dated. On Hong Kong Island, for instance, there are a couple of schools which we consider rather old and where facilities are tight. But on Hong Kong Island, it is really difficult to identify sites for reprovisioning. So we're trying our best to help these schools on a daily operational basis and see whether new facilities can be added as far as possible. But since on Hong Kong Island we can't have new sites, it is really difficult. But won't you tell the administration that you need land, because you allow the availability of sites to decide whether you can provide adequate special schools? Well, as I said right from the beginning, land is a variable resource in Hong Kong, and there are competing demands for land in the community. Of course, we all agree that special schools, as a cause, we should fight for. So we would do our very best to fight for land. Of course, for these schools, we want them to be reprovisioned, but the administration has to balance the needs from different sectors. But we are quite determined and committed to fighting for land for reprovisioning special schools. The DB is of the view that you must engage these schools as far as possible when it comes to the construction or reprovisioning of schools, because you must take into account the needs of users. A school may look very pleasant in its design, but it may not be able to suit the needs of the users. So engagement is very important. Leung Kwo Hong. I think in 2012, I was asked to take a look at this special school when there was an election. It is now 2015, 3 years have elapsed. You told people that because the school would be reprovisioned and therefore there should not be major works done on it. But if the facilities are so poor, that would affect students. So 3 years have passed. You say that some things have moved out, so the school is now more spacious. But what about the ramps for wheelchair? Well, why has it taken you so long for the school to be re-provisioned? If you're going to take that long, why don't you give some assistance to Ko Fook Yew first? Under Secretary, we've had many rounds of discussion with Ko Fook Yew. Next to Ko Fook Yew, there is a vacant primary school site for its expansion. So from the ground floor to the second floor, some activity rooms and teaching or classrooms have been added. So I think the need for space is now met, and we're not going to re-provision Ko Fook Yew in the short term. Let me tell you, when Donald Tsang was still the district officer of Sha Tin, Ko Fook Yew was built. That was in 1979. That's the only school not specially built for the physically handicapped. So I'd like to know how has the students of Ko Fook Yew wronged you to the fact that they have to suffer for so long? How many years have passed since 1979? 36 years. When I first took over the case to negotiate with you, it's been 6 years. Do you want me to conduct a site visit with you to the school again at the next election time? So you have made some improvements to the school. So my question is, when? The next speaker, Dennis Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid in this panel there is only one member from the pro-establishment camp present. Well, I could somehow predict this remark from you. I was saying this to the secretary, so I'm really brilliant. Well, I have got a submission from Principal Law. I think the submission has got very valuable experience and comments for the administration to consider. I think you know that I've mentioned the needs of special schools at FC committee meeting, FC meetings, and many occasions. Some students are admitted to ordinary schools for integrated education, but you have not done enough for integrated education. There's not enough resources, and teachers are not adequately trained. So, in addition to improving facility of special schools, do you have plans to increase the number of special school places so that more students can be placed to schools that suit their needs? Under Secretary, we follow our population projection data and also the rough proportion of students that require special school places in making plans for construction of special schools. The only category of special schools that have a shortage of places, we are identifying sites for them to be constructed. It is likely that in places like Tung Chung, we will have a new special school built. So we do keep an eye on the situation. And I've also explained that we are restrained or we're constrained by shortage of land. When we have land, should it be used for re-provisioning of a special school or construction of a new school? So should we satisfy the new needs or to improve the condition of current students first? When talking about Tung Chung, some parents talk to me about transport to and from home and schools. Do you know whether there are enough rehab buses to take care of all people who need them?
Ms. Sitho, for special schools, we need to reprovision them rather than refurbishment, because some are very old. For example, Qian is below the fire safety standards. It's for physically handicapped students. There's no safe escape route. They have a flight of more than 10 steps when you reach the ground floor. How can the teachers or the janitors help the students to escape in case of fire? If you do some refurbishment for them, it's not going to help. Same for Morning Hill. And Morning Hope School. Well, when teachers have to meet parents, they have to do it in a corridor, and there's no privacy. So here, we should not be talking about refurbishment or improvement of facilities. You should identify sites for reprovision. But unfortunately, the special schools are in the same queue as other mainstream schools. That won't do, because for the other students, they have a choice because of the decline in student population. But for special schools, they have no choice. If they decline an offer, they have nowhere else to go to. So, Under Secretary, you should set up a separate queue for the reprovisioning of special schools. Can you do this? Instead of asking them to join the same queue as mainstream schools? But to some extent, there are two queues already. So we have special considerations for special schools, and they queued in a different manner. Is that really the case, Chairman? Because in the past, the officials didn't tell us that this was the case. Has the policy been changed? If that's the case, I would like to put it on record. Please wait. There are two queues, but when I have one side, and then it may be needed for both. So I've looked at the needs. There are needs from special schools, but there are also needs from other schools. Well, in the coming months, we're going to consider the case of two bisection primary schools to turn into whole day schools. So we have to do some balancing. Well, the switch from bisection schooling to whole day schooling is not something that would affect you ultimately. Well, as chairman, I have to be impartial, but I have to say that I support you, Ms. Ho. Second round, Dr. Jiang. Well, the gap for special schools is especially large. We're talking about an ex-principal He was the principal of special schools. And Kofuk U has been around for decades. The space is very limited. And in Tuen Mun, Morning Light, Morning Hill, is overcrowded. It's very different from Morning Light school in Yunnan. You should try to narrow the gap between old and new special schools. You know that you support us, Chairman, when we ask for the extension of school of special education up to senior secondary grades, because the previous design only cater for education up to Form 3. Under the new NSS system, how many special schools have yet to be improved, and what is the timetable? Well, this is the reality, that the special schools built in different eras have different facilities, and it's our aim to do improvement as far as possible. As for the new secondary school curriculum and improvements to existing schools, as we set out in paragraph 8, we have already completed conversion works for 14 special schools, and the works for another 13 are ongoing, and we are planning for conversion work for some other schools, for 10 other schools. Can you give us a timetable on when the conversion program can be completed? Well, to us, the timetable is as soon as possible. All right, I think time's up. We have to deal with Mr. Peter Cheung's motion. The motion has been tabled for members' information. I won't read it out. So since we have already got a very thorough discussion on the issues, we're short of one member for the quorum. So maybe I should do this. Let me invite Mr. Peter Cheung to elaborate on the contents of the motion for 2 minutes, and then I'll ask the Undersecretary for a short response. And then let's see if we have a quorum. Otherwise, we cannot vote on the motion. So I am given 2 minutes for a filibuster. The motion is about the social responsibility supportive mode. And this seems to be at odds with the issues raised by members a moment ago. We want to improve facilities, and still we have to put this up. Otherwise, the government might have forgotten this, even if resources are available. According to the principle, Mr. Law, we should not regard these schools as schools equipped with a hostel. We should regard those hostels as their homes. Otherwise, the students may have difficulties in adjusting to their home environment once they have completed their education. And if these schools are remotely located, how can the students be equal participants in society? And the wardens in some of these schools are living far away from the students, the residing students. So when the students have needs for the warden to help the warden will have to go upstairs or downstairs to give help. Can the design take into account special needs of such nature? Under Secretary, actually, the special education has been developing very quickly in the last 10 odd years, and people are expecting better facilities. These schools were built during different times, and the facilities are varied. And as you can see in the paper, we have been working very hard to upgrade their facilities. This is an ongoing program. And we're also going to take on board views from parents and school management in the provision of facilities. And I'll put this motion to a vote. Will those in favor of Mr. Peter Cheung's motion, please raise your hands. Hands steady, please. 9 in favor. Those against, please raise your hands. Abstentions? Any abstentions? So 9 for, none against, none abstained. The motion is carried. Next topic. Student hostels on Northern Campus blocks A3 and A4, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. The Undersecretary will remain to join our discussion. Who would like to speak? Well, we have exceeded the allotted time, so can you please make it succinct in the PowerPoint presentations? Maybe I should ask the CUHK to speed it up to save time. I just want to say one thing. We'd like to get the panel's or the committee's support for the CUHK to build these 2 hostels so that they can address the shortage of hostel places for students. With your support and if funding approval is given by the FC, CUHK will start works in the 4th quarter of 2015 to be completed in the 2nd quarter of 2018. Understand there's a PowerPoint presentation. Who from the CUHK will be giving the presentation? Because of time concerns, can you be succinct? Well, we want to build 2 hostels with 680 places to enable our students to enjoy a good learning and a teaching environment. We are still short of 1,270 hostel places. Through this program, we can build 676 places. The total cost is $620 million, and we want to get $465.5 million from government, and the CUHK will show the $155.2 million. The net operating floor area is 5,700 odd square meters. This is going to be built in the it's going to be built on Northern Campus. We have already got a medical science block there, and there are other hostels and research buildings to be provided there. It will be a research center. This application is about 2 hostel blocks here, and we will adopt a practical design, and there will be a green design features to blend in with the environment, and we will make best use of the building height in the provision of facilities. If everything goes on smoothly, we'd like to start the works at the end of this year so that the hostels will be available for our students in 2018. There will be green open space, and there are other facilities for various activities. There will be multi-purpose activity rooms and kitchens for students. The hostel places will be on the lower floors, and there are other common areas on the ground floor. The rooms will accommodate 2 residents, 302 the double occupancy rooms, and there are also single occupancy rooms. We would make the best use of the design to enhance natural lighting and ventilation. For this project, we have introduced the project to Shatin District Council, Taipo District Council, and Taipo Rural Committee, and also village representatives of the neighboring villages. And we have also organized internal consultation sessions for our students. They all support the project. Thank you. 3 members, 4 would like to speak on this paper. Mr. Charles Moore, Mr. Sid Ho, and who else? Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. There will be no second round. So 5 members. Mr. Charles Moore, Ms. Sid Ho, Mrs. Regina Yip, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Are the hostel places for undergrads or postgrad students? But they are for postgrad students. There are concerns that the CUHK have to come up with some funds itself. It's more than $100 million, correct? Would the cost be passed on to undergrad students? Are you going to separate the financial provisions for the 2 different groups of students?
Professor, all boarders pay the same rate, and it's also at a reasonable level. The school has done its level best to secure the remaining 25% of the construction costs. We are quite confident that we can get that. What do you mean by securing the 25% by donation? Yes, that would account for the majority of the 25%. Now, I would like to raise my concern about possibility of cross-subsidy. I think, as you know, local and non-local students may have a different success rates. For local students, only 60 to 70% of them can get a place, and for non-local students, over 90%. Of course, they have a greater need for accommodation. Now, these hostel blocks are mainly for research postgraduates and non-local students. So, will the project help to ease the tension for places? Yes, it's true that we have more non-local students than local students. However, our research programs aim to attract the best students. You talk about student admission. Regardless of the origin of students, our target is to admit the best students. Whether they apply for hostel places is their choice. I just want to reflect my concern, and due to time constraint, I'll move on to my last point. This is a bit far away from the main station. Main campus is about 40%. No, there is no need. We have school shuttle service. So, are you going to to secure donation for more shuttle buses? Well, the cost will be borne by CU Hong Kong. So you will for sure have money to do this. Yes, this won't be a problem. Mr. Ho, we have received inquiries from CU students as to whether these places are for graduate students, undergraduate students, or local students, or exchange students. We follow up on this matter in the education panel a number of times, and that is there are fewer local students in our postgraduate programs. And resources are limited, and as a result, there is a conflict between local and non-local students. I think student hostels of course, should give priority to non-local students. But, for instance, transportation from Hong Kong Island to CU can be quite lengthy. So I think you should provide enough places to remove the conflict between local and exchange students. I think we should welcome students from all over the world, not just from the mainland, so that in our school campuses we can have diversity in culture. Unfortunately, most of our student admission is from the mainland. So I think the grievance felt by local students is justified. So I'd like to ask the administration when you can ensure that sufficient places can be given to CUHK so that there will be less tension. Now, we do not consider this from mainland Hong Kong, from the perspective of mainland Hong Kong tensions or conflicts. Take CU Hong Kong as an example. Even if the project is completed, it will still be 600 places short. So we will do our utmost to provide the shortfall as soon as possible. But when? Before these places available, what mitigation measures does the university have? The allocation of hostel places, I'll defer to the professor to explain later. The administration knows that we still owe the university this amount of hostel places, so we will try our very best to make up for the shortfall as soon as possible. As for the allocation of hostel places, it is something for the university. Professor Phil, when it comes to the planning of hostels, we have other whole hostels in the drawing board. We are making plans to explain to the council the construction of other hostels later. This includes the expansion of our existing hostel blocks, and in Area 39, we want to build 7 blocks in the long term, although in the current paper we're only asking for 2 blocks. But, planning and preparation takes time. Can the university tell us where these 5 blocks are, or rather, what is the bottleneck? Why are you only planning to build 2 blocks here? For all public works projects, there are due procedures to follow. For instance, a site investigation has to be done, so things are already in the pipeline. When all the procedures are completed, we will come back to the panel as soon as possible. So it is the government that filibusters this time. Mrs. Regina Ip. Many members say that research programs admit more non-local students than local students. Now, I think because universities are entirely autonomous, you should, of course, admit the best students. And the question is, there are fewer local students applying to join research programs and not too eager to do a doctorate degree here, or maybe they plan to do it overseas. More than one professors have told local students that if they want to come back to teach in universities, they should further their studies overseas. That would enhance their chances. Is that correct or not? And I'd like to know how many postgraduate or graduate students will be able to live in these new hostels, and do you ensure that local and non-local students are allocated to the same hostel block to enhance opportunities of exchange? Thank you for your question. CUHK As a research-oriented university, we need high-caliber postgraduate students engaged in scientific research with our professors. We take on about 400 postgraduate candidates every year, and there are only two criteria in our consideration. First, their academic qualifications or capability, and secondly, their motive or motivation. For Hong Kong students, I'm sure many of them are able to suit the academic requirements, but when it comes to motivation, well, many people don't regard a doctorate program a good investment. They may have to spend many years to acquire a doctorate degree, and there is no certainty about their future prospects. And it is indeed difficult for us to attract qualified and well-motivated local students to enroll in our postgraduate programs. So it's just like other universities overseas, we have global recruitment. It's true that many of our programs are dominated by non-local students, but we have responded to the appeal of UGC in recruiting overseas non-local students in our research postgraduate programs. We will do more. Professor Kenneth Chen, I think the administration should make up for the shortfall when it comes to hostel places. Now, I am an alma mater alumni of CUHK, so I do support your project. But for other universities, I think they're even worse off. They in town center, they have to identify sites, they have to do some investigation and get the administration's approval. Now, for CUHK, you still have a shortfall of 1,200 odd places. So can you tell us or come back and report to us the progress of a negotiation and how the hostel allocation rates can be improved? Because allocation of hostel places is always a problem. Now, for undergraduate students, they should be given the opportunity of staying in a student hostel for at least 1 year of their program. But for research programs, usually a student should be allowed to stay in a hostel throughout the program. Is that correct? Can you ensure that a postgraduate a student that has demand for a hostel place can be granted one? As you all know, there are different colleges in CUHK. We also have private donations. We've been providing some hostel places using private donations with the construction or the completion of our project. I think at least half of our students can be undergraduate students can be allocated hostels. But for research students, the rate is only 40%. Of course, it's up to them to apply. We believe that with these two blocks, we can raise the placement rate for postgraduate students to 60%, 66%. You said that the design should be practical. Of course, you were not asking for a very luxurious design. But assuming that a postgraduate student has family, what will be the arrangement provided by the university? We have a small number of married hostels, but not here, not in this block, but in some other hostels, a small amount. So can the administration give me paper later on the policy aspect. Mr. Long Kwa Hong. But you still owe CU Hong Kong 1,270 publicly funded hostel places. When are you going to pay this debt? You now are building hostels for postgraduate students. I know it is more difficult to provide places for them. And how come in February 2012 you are going to provide 1,840 extra places to cater for the needs of exchange students, right? When are you going to return to repay this debt? In February 2006, you decided to provide an additional 1,800 odd publicly funded student hostel places. So I think in CUHK you don't have a problem with availability of land. The problem is when are you going to build it or not. Since you have money to build publicly funded hostel places, I can understand that because the placement rate is about 40% only. You want to raise it. I have no discrimination against them, but you should also make up for the shortfall in publicly funded student hostel places to the UGC funded sector. Do you want me to provide land for you?
We owe CUHK 1,270 places, hostel places. We have taken into account all the ongoing and planned projects. So here we're talking about 600 odd places. The remaining will be the address in due course, and different projects progress at different pace. Unless my colleagues here can supplement, I don't have a definite date for meeting the target. CUHK has no problem with land. Can you reply on behalf of CY Leung? I asked a question about why land is a problem with CUHK. I didn't say that. There are certain procedures to follow for every project, including feasibility study and engineering and construction. I'll try to go back and see if I can provide additional information for members. All members who would like to raise questions, who would like to speak, have spoken. I have this letter from Mr. Tommy Zhang, who is a member of the Council of CUHK. He cannot attend this session because of a conflict of engagement. I understand that the project will be submitted to the PWSC for approval in mid-2015. I don't think anyone here would object to that, right? No objection to the submission of the item to the PWSC? Of course, no objection. But we'd like to know information on the shortfall for each university and also the timetables. We want to get some information on the shortfall and the timetable, and if there's no timetable, the reason why. Undersecretary, you have heard that. So we support the submission of this item to the PWSC. The message I've received is that we all support that. Next item. Student financial assistance for post-secondary students. Paper CP4 748 1415 bracket 05. The Undersecretary will remain for this item. Who would like to speak on this item? Hands up, please. Mr. Peter Zhang and Deputy Chairman. Who else?
咁或者請副局長。
Undersecretary, for a very brief introduction, please. Under the prevailing policy, the government would make sure that no student will be deprived of tertiary education because of lack of means, for a number of loan schemes and other measures to help post-secondary secondary students. The details are set out in the paper. To make sure that all the support measures and schemes can help students, we have conducted reviews regularly. We have reduced the interest rate and extended the repayment period, and the students can will be allowed to repay the loan only after a year has passed since graduation. We also speed up the process of recovering default loan payments. We also encourage students to manage their finances prudently. Some 9,000 cases of default have been covered by our legal recovery process, and another 4,000 or so cases will be subject to further recovery procedures. Wong Kok Heng, Mr. Peter Chung, Dr. Kenneth Chan, Dr. Helena Wong, and Mr. Wong Kok Heng. I don't think we can finish by 6:30, so I'm going to extend the meeting by 15 minutes. 3 minutes, Mr. Wong Kok Heng, for questions and answers, and no second round will be allowed. I hope the government can provide more support. For example, can interest start to accrue after graduation only? And I've noticed that in your paper you have mentioned that you are gradually phasing the monthly repayment arrangement in lieu of quarterly repayment. Some students may have genuine financial difficulties. Maybe after graduation, for a considerable period of time, they are unable to get jobs. For these students, can they be given some lenient treatment? 3 questions. Undersecretary, for interest is only accrued for non-means tested loans. For those loan schemes with means tests, and that means the financial need is ascertained, the repayment will only start after graduation. For those with no means test, it's important to start to accrue interest when the loan is granted, because no means test has been conducted. The interest rate is not high at all. Can the student be given a chance? Either you pass a means test or you pay an interest right away. Can a choice be given? Actually, there's already the choice for the student. The student decides to pass the means test of the SFO or not. Well, if he passes the means test, the non-means, the interest-free test loan will be offered. But if he fails the means test, or he doesn't really want to take the means test, then he will get a loan under the non-means tested loan scheme. Actually, for new graduates, they have to repay the loan on a monthly basis. This has already started. It's good to build up the habit to repay the loan monthly, but of course, new graduates may not be able to get jobs. Under the current arrangement, new graduates can opt to defer the repayment by 1 year after graduation. And if the if after graduation he continues with his studies or there are family problems, they can ask for a deferment of 2 years, which is interest-free, if there are special circumstances. Some 80% of such applications are approved. Mr. Peter Cheung, my concern is really simple, and it's about the repayment. I know that there are students on CSSA. After graduation, he may get a job, he may get a pay of $10,000 or so. The SWD would disregard the money for repayment of the loan. And if he's on CSSA, for the discretionary portion, he can only get $2,500. So he is unable to repay your loan forever. And with the interest accruing, the repayment amount is getting bigger and bigger. The SFO should communicate with the SWD. The student should be allowed to repay the loan first before the CSSA amount is reduced. I will defer to the Deputy Secretary. Mr. Cheung is asking a question about students who are on CSSA, or the families are on CSSA. When they are students, we expedite the process of approval. We will not ask for a lot of details or ascertain a lot of information with SWD. This year we have come up with a new arrangement. If in the past the SWD would deduct the CSSA payment for rent. After we have talked to SWD, this is no longer the case. And after graduation, when the student has graduated and has been holding jobs, and if his income is low, he can ask for deferment of repayment. Understand that what the problem is about. Under the CCF, there's another scheme to help CSSA recipient to save money. For students whose families are on CSSA, the CSCF will be able to offer some assistance. The important thing is that he earns $10,000, and $3,000 is spent on repayment. That would be fair. But now, with the discretionary amount deducted, he's unable to repay the loan. Can we change some arrangements for the means-tested loan schemes? Can interest start to accrue after graduation? But from the perspective of the government, since there's no means test and you have no idea how the loan is used for. Actually, in Hong Kong, the competition is fierce for post-secondary education, and if the student has the need to take out a loan, and given that the government is in very healthy financial position, so please consider the proposal to accrue interest only after graduation. It's not a question about the background of the student, whether he can get a job after graduation and whether he can get a good pay. All these are uncertain. So you may say that they can apply for the deferment of repayment. So why can't you make it simple and only to start to accrue interest after graduation? That will provide some relief to these students who may be facing difficulties. For defaulters, if you want to resort to legal proceedings to recover the loan, have you assessed whether the cost is higher for the recovery than the loan itself? You may say this is a moral issue, and you are successful in recovering from the defaulters. Are you better off even if you are successful? Under Secretary, for loans granted under the non-means tested schemes, we only charge an interest of 1.39% at a no gain, no loss basis for the government. If we do not charge interest, that means that the taxpayer will be paying something for the loans. So we have no intention to do what has been suggested. As for the other questions, I'll defer to my Deputy Secretary. I would ask the Chairman to take the chair again. Deputy Secretary, let me supplement what the Under Secretary has said. For students who have taken out loans under the non-means tested schemes, some of them do not really want to take the means test, or they have failed the means test. Some of these students are from families with an income level of 90% or even 100% of the medium income level for the entire population. At present, the interest rate is 1.39%. If it's reduced or waived, then there's no certainty that the student will only take out a loan if it's really needed. The interest rate is really very low. The interest rate for the means tested scheme is just 1%, and for the non-means tested scheme, 1.39%. Some 90 people are responsible for pursuing defaults, where more than 170,000 accounts of loan repayment. In the past, the repayment period was 5 years. Now it's as long as 15 years. So in the past, the account will be fully settled in 5 years. Now it can be as long as 15 years. We have a team of colleagues to recover loans. We have 13,000 default cases. The number has increased, but in terms of ratio, it's lower than the past. So we have to resort to effective means to pursue these cases.
Well, we'll talk about when a student should start repaying. Now, for those who that do not have been means tested, they have to start repaying even as a student. No. Starting to accrue interest. All right. What is actually the difference if you don't do that when he is still a student? I understand that if you don't do so, then there would be a revenue forgone to the administration. But if you do not start calculating the interest before he graduates, how much money are we talking about? Do you get the point, Under Secretary? This is not just about the money involved. Now, if the amount is so small, you may argue on the other side that is the impact on the student is limited. We should go back to the original intention of the scheme and whether there will be a side effect. That is, some students might take out loans although he don't really need them. Next, Deputy Chairman. We have got a report from the Ombudsman, and it is said that repayment by those in employment is not very desirable. The default rate is quite high. So I'd like to ask whether the administration has come up with any strategy. Ombudsman said it was best to pass on the information to the credit data bank. But according to the Privacy Commissioner, this is not so good. So how are you going to enhance your effectiveness in recovering the loans? And the Secretary, as mentioned in the paper, in recent years we have done more to recover the faults. In the past few years, even in the category mentioned by Mr. Ip, the percentage of the fault has lowered. We'll continue to do what we are doing, and there are suggestions that perhaps the information of defaulters can be passed on to the credit data base, but the Privacy Commissioner has some concerns. So because of public education, we believe the effectiveness will be improved in the future. Yes, for those who are working, it's a bit difficult to say, but for students in self-financing programs, inevitably they have to take out bigger loans. The record of repayment is not so bad. However, the loans are bigger in size. I think this is because self-financing students do not get any subsidy from the government, so they have to take out loans, bigger loans, and they may not be able to make enough to repay the debts, and the repayment time will be lengthened. Perhaps you should consider providing some subsidy to students in self-financing programs. So I think it is about the ratio between publicly funded and self-financing programs. When a student chooses to engage in a self-financing program, of course he has to consider his affordability, and we do have schemes to give them grants after means testing. Dr. Eleanor Wong. The DP has mentioned this a number of times, and that is the point mentioned by the Deputy Chairman. Many students that have taken out loans are engaged in self-financing sub-degree or degree programs. For some of these programs, tuition fees are so high. They can range from $50,000 to $60,000 to even $100,000 per year. And after completing a program, a student, of course, will be heavily indebted if they have taken out loans from the administration. So it all boils down to government's subsidy to self-financing and locally accredited programs. Now, there should be some form of vouchers. You have been giving out kindergarten education vouchers. Perhaps you should consider a flat rate of vouchers for tertiary education. If a person is expected to spend 15 years to repay a loan he has taken out, and if by the time he has repaid in full is already in his 30s, and how can he expect to save enough to get married and to raise a home? The problem is you are not providing any subsidy to these people, and as a result they are heavily indebted. So Under Secretary, what can you do to help them? In replying to the Deputy Chairman's question, I already said that a student has to consider his financial capability when he enroll in a self-financing program, his career prospects and his possible financial commitment, and in deciding whether he should enroll in a self-financing program or other programs. If his household income is limited, then as set out in the paper, we do have means-tested financial assistance scheme. Now, if his family income is roughly the same of a counterpart engaged in a UGC program, then the level of the percentage of subsidy he gets will be very similar to what his counterpart gets. So if there is a genuine financial need, there is already government assistance. And if the income is above the ceiling, then he will have to fend for himself. Can a repayment be waived if a student fails to seek employment soon after his graduation? Well, he can choose to start repaying 1 year after graduation. What if he is still unemployed after 1 year? If a student has financial difficulties, he can talk to us and we can give special consideration. Thank you. So all members who want to speak on this item have all asked questions. So discussion of this item ends here. AOB. We have to end by 6:45. We have only 1.5 minutes left. I have sought the view of the Deputy Chairman. He wanted to discuss overseas duty visits, but since we've only got a minute or so left and there aren't too many members left, so with the agreement of the Deputy Chairman, we will defer this item to our next meeting. And I think it will also be more appropriate for Dr. Helen Wong's motion to be dealt with at the next meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance. Meeting adjourned.